Hello and welcome to episode 34 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Metsmerizedonline.com. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And we're joined by a friend of the show, basically third party here, Jacob Resnick. Jacob, always good to see you, man. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. I think the obvious here is pitchers and catchers as we're recording this today, reported yesterday, officially Wednesday. Baseball is upon us. We got the guys in shorts, t-shirts, throwing, catching, hitting. Everybody's in the best shape of their life. Everybody's undefeated right now. Just want to get your temperatures here as we now get into spring and the season right around the corner. Jacob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's always great to finally reach this point after a dreary winter. Not so much for Mets news purposes, but just dreary in terms of the weather. And just to see guys down there throwing doesn't mean anything. You know, they're not even playing fake games yet, let alone real games. But it's just nice to see blue and orange and green and all of the bright colors down in Port St. Lucie.
Well, yeah, now with Cohen Mets, it is excitement that the team's there. I mean, kind of before it was, well, let's hurry up and get this Wilpon off season over with. And even if the Mets aren't going to lose, I just want to watch them in action, any kind of action. So it's nice to have baseball and to have fans excited about the team. And speaking of best shape of your life, I think I mentioned it to Jacob earlier in a message. I think Pete Alonso might be in the best shape of his life. He's one of the guys that looked noticeably slimmer, and kind of Brandon Nimmo on the other end. Brandon Nimmo looked like he's been in a weight room the entire offseason. So maybe he's going to power up a little bit more. But yeah, those are kind of the two guys I noticed so far of best shape in their life so far.
Yeah, and it looked like Tyler McGill looks like he lost a little bit of weight too. He was throwing a bullpen today. You know, it's funny, right? We don't know it as much, but back in the day, spring training was for guys to actually get ready, and now dudes come in, ready to rock, great shape. They're just fine tuned and ready to go. But before we kind of get in depth about camp and some of the new faces around the Mets spring training, there is a World Baseball Classic that's going to be played at the beginning of the month in March. Obviously, a lot of Mets are playing. I think the Mets might have the most out of any team as far as major leaguers that are playing in the tournament. Jacob, I know you're super excited about it. We all are. Maybe me a little less so because now the Mets are actually good when there's a World Baseball Classic, so I don't want anybody to get hurt. But just your kind of initial thoughts and, what you're looking for storyline-wise, team-wise, players or anything, with the World Baseball Classic here.
Yeah, I think, I definitely understand that point of view. You don't want your players to get injured. You want them to be playing in spring training games with the team, especially with the Mets have so many new guys in the fold, and some of those guys are leaving. Jose Quintana, Omar Narvaez, who I think that might be kind of one of the more questionable guys who are leaving just as a new catcher. Would probably need to spend as much time as possible to get to know the new pitching staff he's going to be working with. But I don't think you could fault anyone for wanting to play and represent their country because there's just something different when guys put the Venezuela or the United States or whatever it is across their chest. It just kind of brings something else, something extra out of them, and it's exciting. I mean, I remember getting super excited for the last one and the one before that, and not sure I remember the 09 one that well or the 06 one, but it's just always a great showcase of baseball and cultures and international talents, and like you mentioned, lots of current Mets, lots of former Mets. I think that was one of the more exciting things to see the names that ended up on the rosters. And I think kind of I don't want to say one of the funnier ones, but just the ones that kind of make you chuckle and think about what once was when you have Yoenis Cespedes playing for the Cuban team and
right.
Matt Harvey playing for the Italy team. So just kind of going to be fun to see all these guys, on a field competing, and it's a good thing that these guys are going to be competing for something a little more serious than spring training games. You hope that they obviously don't, turn that excitement into, going too hard and then injuring themselves in that way. But if they injure themselves in those games, they might have injured themselves just as much in a spring training game. So I only have positive thoughts about it, and really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and Mike, before I get to you real quick, I saw Matt Harvey's name. I called my friends in Italy that are involved with the national team of baseball over there, and I just wanted to confirm, is it the same Matt Harvey? Because all his time in New York, never heard anything about him being in town. You'd think that would have gotten a little more mention there, but still pretty cool. But Mike, why don't we get your thoughts as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big WC fan. I'm just pumped for it. And yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. I mean, it got put off because it was supposed to be during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of have 6 years in between. So it's kind of had trouble like getting some consistency and getting the buzz. But I think this one will be a really good one to kind of take off. And I mean, this is a good thing for baseball. I mean, you've got like Great Britain playing, you've got like Chinese Taipei playing, you've got the Netherlands, you got all these countries, Israel, Nicaragua, Panama. I mean, a lot of these rosters have some big leaguers or minor leaguers on it. So it shows you that the game of baseball is starting to grow a little bit. And I think this can only help with that. And yeah, like Jacob said, I mean, but beyond just the Mets, it is fun to kind of see some of the former Mets that are playing, like Cespedes and Harvey and Ruben Tejada. And even Oliver Perez is on the pitcher's pool for Mexico, so he might end up
Cockroach.
playing on. He just hangs around. All you have to do is throw with your left hand, and you're around in baseball for a while. But yeah, I know, and I mean, I know some fans from my tweeting. Some fans are just like kind of meh about it, and like, whatever. What is this? But then you kind of watch the interviews with like Freddie Freeman. This is a guy that has a World Series ring.
Right.
And he was talking about how much this means to him to be able to play for Team Canada and how important it is to him. And there's been other guys talking about how they've played in World Series, and this is a bigger accomplishment for them. I mean, it means a lot for these players. And just today, Mookie Betts was talking about he was kind of on the fence about playing, and then he saw the opportunity to play with Mike Trout.
Right.
So now you got Mike Trout and Mookie Betts in the same outfield. You got that USA team that's so good that Pete Alonso is not even going to be able to start at first base.
Right.
I mean, it's just fun to see these talented rosters. I mean, we see them in the All-Star games where you got these stacked rosters, but no one cares about that.
Right.
No one plays hard. So you have some legitimate with the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Venezuela, USA. You have some legitimate all-star looking lineups and rotations that are playing for real. These guys want to win. So I'm pretty excited for it. And we're only a couple of weeks away from the games. And I think to kind of get on to the hurt, you're in shape type thing, I get back to what you mentioned, Sal. These guys come to camp in shape. Like you said, it used to be, this is how you kind of got in shape. These players come in shape, ready to go now. And for years, a lot of players have talked about how spring training is too long. They could get right into the game. So this kind of gets them into competitive games earlier, like a lot of these guys want to do. And it's not like they're just ramping up all of a sudden to play these games. These guys are ready for it. So I think, yeah, of course there's going to be some injuries, but I don't think it's going to be any more typical injuries than you're going to see in spring training anyway. The type of muscle stuff that we see, there's been a couple already, like Nestor Cortez and a couple other guys that came to camp with those little nagging things and dropped out. So, but yeah, I'm excited. And I mean, for Mets fans that are excited about it, they've got plenty to watch with 9 big leaguers and 15 guys overall. So I'm excited for the games to get going.
Yeah, I do like the WBC. Like I said, it's the first time the Mets are like contenders when this is going on. So you worry about guys getting hurt. But, I agree with as far as what you said, Mike, is, guys are in shape now. I don't worry much about the hitters as much as the pitchers. I think that I worry more about injuries just because, they aren't kind of, whether they come in the camp in shape or not, they do use spring training to ramp up, get their throwing program in and things like that. So you just hope that it works out there. But listen,
well, from a pitching standpoint, they do have rules in place.
Right.
They have rules just so the viewers know, like in the first round, you can only pitch 65 pitches.
Gotcha.
And then it goes up from there. And there's rules about if you throw so many pitches out of the bullpen, you can't throw the next day. So they do have those in place to kind of protect the arms, knowing that, yeah, we are still in March. So maybe some of these guys aren't built up, so we don't want them to rush into it. So they do have some things in place to kind of protect against the injuries to arms.
So, and that's a great point. And I honestly didn't even realize that myself. I forgot the restrictions that they had put in. But speaking of rules, on the flip side, obviously baseball is going to have a lot of new rules this year. Do you like the fact that the WBC, at least for continuity purpose, to help these players that aren't going to be at spring to like work with these new rules? Do you think that the tournament should have used those, 2023 rules that they're implementing? Or do you like the fact that they're sticking with the more traditional type? Jacob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could kind of go either way on it. I think, and I can't remember if I actually heard this or I'm just thinking that this is kind of why they did that, is just because you got all these international teams, guys coming from different leagues. They play under different rules, and that might not have these new rules in their own leagues, obviously. And obviously you've got to comply with that from a federal baseball international standpoint. So, and I think at the end of the day, the new rules are like not something you're gonna like need more than a few spring training games to like get used to. I think especially for like the rules on the shifts, like you don't really need to practice with that because guys are used to fielding balls on the infield in normal spots for their entire careers. The pitch clock for pitchers and hitters, like that's the kind of thing you just might need a couple games worth of experience with. And, the bigger bases are only for safety, not really something you have to adjust to. So, I think it's fine. I mean, I'm sure some rules aficionados like Buck Showalter definitely would hope that they would be using them, but and you never know that guys might only be at their WBC teams for a week and a half, 2 weeks, and they come right back and they'll get the experience when they come back to spring training. So yeah, I don't really think it's much to talk about there.
Yeah, and so actually Buck talked about it and was glad that they weren't forcing the rules on to these other players. Like Jacob said, this is run by federal baseball. So we're talking about countries that don't have a lot of the rules that they're implementing and some of the other rules that are being implemented, like there is the universal DH and stuff.
Right.
But I think it makes sense not to force these guys into it. But I'm like, all these guys are going to have some time in camp with their major league team to kind of go through it. Like Jacob said, I think pitch clock's really the one where some guys are going to have issues, but you also have to remember that it's been in the minor leagues long enough now that, a fair amount of guys that pitch in the big leagues have had some experience with it, and the hitters too. I do think that's kind of something that doesn't get talked about a lot is Major League Baseball has had rules on the book so that the hitter is supposed to stay in the box and be ready, but that's not really something that's ever been enforced.
Right.
Now with they call it the pitch clock, but there's actually a batter clock too. So it'll be interesting to see. We don't really have like any Nomar Garciaparra type guys or David Ortiz anymore that kind of mess around and getting ready. So it won't be a big deal, but there'll definitely be some hitters that are getting ticked off that they're getting rushed into. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and kind of to put a bow on everything, I just wondering as far as if there's any storylines, teams, players that you're looking in particular in the tournament. I know for me, a couple personally. I think it's pretty cool that Cuba's allowing major league players that defected to play on the team for, I think it's for the first time ever. Obviously, they're not allowed to practice with the teams, in Cuba or anything like that. So all those major league guys that'll be playing with them once they get, I guess it's to Taiwan. I believe that I forget what pool it is. But I believe they start in Taiwan where Italy's playing. That they'll be the first time together. I think that'll be interesting. USA's roster, their lineup is stacked. You have the best player in the sport and trout, one of the best in trout playing. That should be really interesting. I don't think their pitching quite matches up to their lineup, but we'll see how that holds up. And seeing Mark DeRosa manage for the first time really at any level. I know he put his name in the ring a few years ago for the Mets managerial job. Just interested to see how he kind of this tournament, because I know he's someone that would like to, man the dugouts one day, and this could, really, I guess, help, boost that or whatever. So I'm just, Jacob, I'll start with you. Just any kind of curious storylines, anything you're looking forward to for this?
Yeah, I mean, nothing really in terms of a storyline other than just looking forward to seeing the best of the best from these countries. I mean, you mentioned the U.S., but the Dominican team and the Japanese team, the Korean team, I mean, these are like the best of the best from these countries, especially now that you have guys like Trout and Ohtani committing to play for their countries. I mean, it's a national all-star team for all of these guys. So I'm looking forward to just seeing kind of the heavyweights going at it, and hoping that there's a Cinderella somewhere, like we've seen Israel in the past, and,
right.
and some other smaller countries advancing out of the group stage at least. So just kind of looking forward to it, and I think just my final point on everything is you've seen a lot of people maybe not getting too excited for it. Definitely some people are getting super excited for it, like me and Mike are, but to the people who aren't so excited yet, I think it's definitely hard to drum up the excitement and the interest like now when we're still a few weeks out. But once those games start, it's crazy, and I think people are gonna fall in love with it. Just like you saw people, when the World Cup was going on,
right.
People who didn't watch soccer, people don't watch soccer at all. The second you put United States on a jersey and they're on national TV and put them up against England, like a rival country, it's in that way, like everyone fell in love with it. So I'm definitely predicting some of the same coming up.
Yeah, and to me, one of the things I tweeted about was the Dominican lineup was getting a lot of pub, and respectfully so, but without Jose Ramirez, I think that kind of took a hit. And I was talking about how I thought the U.S. lineup was underrated. I think they have the best lineup in the tournament. And but like you said, Sal, the pitching isn't great for the U.S. and they've already lost some pitchers too.
Right.
So yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, like Jacob said, hopefully you get like some Cinderella team like Israel or Italy or some team, even the Netherlands. The Netherlands have a lot of guys with MLB experience that you wouldn't think of. Panama, kind of the same way. So you have some of these teams that have guys that you're going to be like, whoa, hey, there's some big leaguers on there. They have a chance. And yeah, it's just fun. And then you'll see like the mixture of some guys you haven't seen for a while,
right.
that are out of the big leagues and stuff. So, and I think kind of a storyline that goes along with the Mets for the WBC is actually the guys that aren't at the WBC.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Mets' entire starting infield is at the WBC. So guys like Mark Vientos, Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, other guys are going to get a chance to get a ton of reps when they normally wouldn't. Even Francisco Alvarez, with Narvaez gone, Alvarez will even get some more reps behind the plate. And I mean, even we might get to see Kevin Parada a little more than we normally would have. So yeah, it certainly will see some effects in the Mets camp, and which is good because I mean, for me, I'm kind of like the superstar players, the everyday players. They don't really think much of spring training. This is just going up for me. I'm fine with that because I always get more excited about the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th inning when those young prospects come in, because that's your first chance to see some of these guys, or first chance to get a long look at a lot of these guys. I mean, that's how a lot of Mets fans got eyes on Francisco Alvarez, was in spring training, like when he had a home run off Jacob DeGrom, and when Ronnie Mauricio, we could talk about Jacob DeGrom too. I get a good segue. We could talk about him and how he's already had a setback because of the cold in Arizona.
Listen, I don't want to delve too deep into it. You don't want to be petty, whatever. You wish the best. You wished health for everyone. I would say at this point, though, everything worked out for everyone. Jake got his money, and the Mets, as of right now, signed players that'll be on the field. So I think everybody won. I've heard that term just a precaution enough to know that if that happened here and he signed, it would be all over the back pages of every outlet. So things work out, I think, the way they're supposed to. And I guess that's a better segue because the guy that took his locker in spring training apparently knew met Justin Verlander. He's there on Wednesday. Kodai Senga arrived yesterday, too. They had their first bullpens. Obviously, it's just guys in T-shirts and shorts and their tight shirts and pants throwing bullpens and whatnot. But, just kind of your first, impressions, interviews, things like that. And Verlander was talking about he doesn't really care about being the open day starter. It's not why he's here. He's, it's a bigger goal than that. So just want to get your first impressions of these new guys. Jacob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, just with Verlander to start, the first thing that really struck me is just like this guy's a professional. He's a guy who's been around for a long time and just doesn't have time to kind of play around when it comes to spring training. Like the optimism of obviously he's optimistic, but just like the if he showed up to national spring training or pirate spring training, he wasn't not the type of guy who's going to go and say, yeah, we're going to win a World Series. But he knows why he's here. He's the kind of guy who's just kind of going to let his experience and his resume do the talking, and just kind of seems like he's ready to match wits with Scherzer. Just based on hearing both of them talk about each other. Like, I know there's been talk about their relationship in the past when they were teammates in Detroit, and they're ready to just kind of put that behind them and just let their play do the talking. And it's just kind of a great thing for this organization to be able to put those two guys out there at the top of the rotation. And Senga, we heard from earlier today, just kind of seems like a guy who's taking it all in. And we heard that he was hitting 96 in his first bullpen. Yep. His forkball looked great, and they asked him how it went, and he said so. So if this is so, just looking forward to seeing him get into games and kind of get ready for the regular season. Just seems like he's up for the challenge, to fill in behind the two aces at the top of the rotation. So far so good, and it's gonna be fun for sure.
Yeah, and he loves pizza. Said that, so that's great too. Mike, real quick, I do want to ask you. You mentioned, what Senga was saying. He did say something about how the slope of the mound is a little deeper, in over stateside in the MLB, and something he's got to adjust. Do you think that's something like that should be worrisome or whatever? It's just or something he'll adjust rather quickly too and keep rolling here.
I mean, it sounds like, he's adjusting to a lot of different things. So, he's going from 6-man rotation.
Yep.
If you listen to his interview with Pitching Ninja today, he's also talked about the huge difference in the balls too. The American ball is slicker, slippery, lower seams, hard. The Japanese ball has a little bit of a give to it. So it was really fascinating to listen to him talk about. So before he went and worked out for a lot of teams, talked to a lot of teams, he went to Driveline first, because he knew that there was going to be some acclimation that he needed to get to the ball we use here. And he went there and they did all the metrics with the Japanese ball, and then did the metrics with the US ball. And he already adjusted his grips and everything. He talked about how he essentially has a new cutter that he's using is completely different than what he did in Japan, and how he tweaked his grips on other pitches so that it's right for the US ball. So I think, in a short period that we've gotten to hear him talk, we're talking about a guy that's a really smart individual that knows how to pitch and that's going to make adjustments. This is a guy that threw 5 to 6 pitches quite often in Japan, and he said right now he's going to be a 4-pitch pitcher until he masters them with the US ball, and then he'll tweak and add during the season, which is, it's very similar to, he mentioned Yu Darvish. That's a type of thing that Yu Darvish has done. Darvish is 35, and added a pitch in the middle of last year to his repertoire. So very similar in the fact that this is a guy that is always looking to get better and always adjusting and doing the things that he needs to do to be successful. And I think I'm trying to stay like even keeled because I wanted the Mets to sign Senga, and they did. And then he gets here, and beyond just, I mean, the natural ability, the guy smiles more than, I mean, he might smile more than Brandon Nimmo. Like, the guy is always smiling and laughing in his interviews, and I mean, that's just going to fit in, make it such an easy transition with his teammates and with the New York media. I mean, the New York media was already eating it up today, laughing at stuff with him. So, I mean, it's good to see him kind of just fitting in already. I mean, it's got to be hard for him. He's got his translator up there. He said he never been to New York before he met with the Mets. So, I mean, this is a huge transition from a lot of standpoints for him, and it looked like everything's going well so far. Yeah, and for Verlander and, I mean, guys like Scherzer, this is just, I mean, this is everything normal to them. Like this, they're not rushing anything. They're not trying to push anything. I mean, Scherzer just said he wants to try to get to 200 innings this year. I mean, yeah, be optimistic. I mean,
Sure.
200 innings counting like 4 or 5 starts in the playoffs would be fantastic.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
between him and Verlander, it's just kind of crazy. Like Verlander's, I don't care if I start opening day. I was thinking about it as like, when's the last time a guy won the Cy Young, was healthy in the next year, and didn't start opening day? I mean,
right.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can't imagine that it's happened very many times. But I think, I mean, obviously these guys are on like a pretty even level, but Scherzer's been here a year. So I think that's ultimately the guy you go with just because he's been here a year, and there's really not much. I mean, there's not much difference talent-wise between these two guys. So, yeah, I mean, either way, I mean, 1, 2, you can't go wrong with those guys. And Senga looks like he's going to be a very good 3. So, I mean, the top of this rotation's going to be really good for a team that, I mean, when you lose a guy like DeGrom, injuries or whatnot, I mean, you have to replace the talent, and they certainly did that.
Yeah, it's funny. I keep thinking about Chris Russo on High Heat when he talks about the Mets. He keeps bringing up the fact that the Mets are the same team that they were last year. That's all he keeps saying. The Mets are the same team that they were last year. The Mets won 101 games last year. If they're the same team, I'll do backflips. I'll take that all day. Just because you necessarily may not have gotten better on paper from last year to this year doesn't mean that you're not just as good. If you're the same team, that's a 100-win team. Like you said about Scherzer, 200 innings would be great. I would assume that's going to be around the 150 mark realistically. Because he's always good for an IL stint or 2 during the year. He's older, whatever. But I look for him to have a better year than he did last year. And when he pitched, he was great, obviously, outside the playoff start. He's a year into New York, like you said. He's comfortable. He joked with the media when he sat down at the podium, said, "Oh, it's nice to see everybody. I know everybody's faces now. Like, I know you." And I think, whether he'll admit it or not, it probably took a little bit to get used to, get comfortable in New York. But I think, a year in, you should expect more from him whenever he's on the mound. I think he'll have another big year. And shout out to Verlander too, as far as like we're talking about, everybody in the best shape of their life, whatever. Guy just won a Cy Young and the World Series and just got paid and turned 40 last week, or had his 40th birthday party last week before spring training. Looks great. Looks in phenomenal shape. So I appreciate that, get those flashbacks of Alva Perez getting his contract way back when and showing up a little bit out of shape there in camp. But, that's why another reason why you bring this guy like Verlander in. He's a pro's pro. They know what the goal is. So it's cool to see. And, bringing up that guy named DeGrom, thanks for the memories, man. We're on to 2023 now. It's all good.
Also, just real quick, just because you brought up DeGrom and you also brought up, people talking about like the Mets, just like they're the same team. First of all, yeah, like you said, if they're the same team this year, great. They won 101 games. But also, like, they got better inarguably.
Mm-hmm.
They kept the guys they needed to keep. Nimmo, Diaz, Ottavino. They kept those guys. They replaced DeGrom. Obviously you don't want to lose DeGrom, but they only got half a season of DeGrom last year, replaced him with Verlander, who you expect to be healthy for an entire year. Senga, the upside over, a guy like, when you look at Senga and Quintana, probably more upside than the Bassett Walker duo, if, not a similar floor. You add David Robertson to improve over, whatever the Mets were throwing in front of Ottavino and Diaz last year, Michael Givens or whatever. And then, things like, Omar Narvaez is a better player than James McCann. Tommy Pham, who, like, I'm not crazy about the Tommy Pham, as a player. But, like, compared to Tyler Naquin, like, just compared to what they were running out for most of last year. It's just Travis, it's just not even a comparison. So to say that the Mets just, like, stalled out, like, they didn't spend, however many hundreds of millions of dollars they did, like, just to stay the same. They got better. They got better on the margins. They added a ton of interesting bullpen pieces, and you hope that one or two sticks. So yeah, like, anyone who says the Mets are just the same team they were last year, if you're right, great. we're happy. If you're wrong and they got better, then it seems too obvious to me.
And
I will say one thing I do disagree with the Mets is the last couple of weeks, with there still being some bullpen arms available, all we've heard is, well, they want optional guys, optional guys, and then Andrew Chafin and Matt Moore kind of signed 1-year deals that look, pretty cheap, and then you're talking about a Steve Cohen Met, so it's like, what are we kind of doing here? I do think it's kind of surprising / disappointing to a point that they certainly could have added another lefty, and it's not just the fact that Chafin and Moore are lefties, it's the fact that they were really good pitchers last year overall. So I think either of those guys certainly would have helped the bullpen. And one thing with that too is, if they don't do it now, they're going to add a bullpen piece at the deadline. That likelihood for every contending team almost always adds a bullpen piece at the deadline. So I just thought, like, it would be good to get one of those guys now. But like Jacob said, they have built good depth in the bullpen. They picked up a ton of interesting arms between Jeff Brigham, Eliza Hernandez, Zach Green, Stephen Holdings. There's
Brooks Raley, who they traded for, who should be really good for them.
Yeah, it's a deep bullpen, and there's, you got a bunch of guys in there that you hopefully strike lightning with one of those guys. Bryce Montez Dioco, who we saw a little bit last year, is on the 40 still. So, they have some intriguing arms that can kind of bring up the back end of that bullpen, which certainly hasn't always been the case. We've seen a lot of not interesting in a good way arms pitching in the 6th, 7th inning for the Mets before the Steve Cohen Mets. So, yeah, like Jacob said, they built a lot on the margins. And I think when you're talking about how much Verlander pitched compared to DeGrom last year, just using that, it's a pretty big boost. And for the fact that I have more, I don't really care what their ages are. I have more confidence in Scherzer and Verlander being healthy than I do DeGrom. That's just where we are. And it's tough. And I think it's sad because I want DeGrom. He was a Hall of Fame player, and I'd like to see him in the Hall of Fame. But it just looks at, it could be we're at the point where DeGrom's not healthy for a season ever again. So, yeah, I think the Mets did the right thing, and it's looking good that Verlander's looking good, Scherzer's looking good, everyone's healthy, and let's hope we can say that still in a month.
Yeah, I know. Something blocky will come up. We talk about opening day. I really don't care who starts opening day. We saw what McGill started opening day last year because, Scherzer had the side thing or whatever it was, the bulky ankle or whatever it was to start spring. They're deep enough where, that first time through the rotation, I don't really care who pitches day one, whatever. You're longing for October here. And, the other thing is I've been saying it ad nauseum since the playoffs started this year with what the Phillies did. You don't have to win 100 games and fight for a division and go on fumes into the postseason. You got to be healthy and you got to be hot. So I look at the Phillies at that model. If they win 85 to 90 games and make the tournament and they're hot at the right time, I'll take that over fighting to win a division 100 plus games and running on fumes by the time you get in. So, be hot, be healthy at the end of September. And that's all I think you really need to worry about. And, we'll see what happens. Mike, you mentioned as far as we were in agreement, wanted them to bolster a little bit more of the bullpen. I agreed there. But the deadline this year will be very interesting. I'll be, curious to see if Billy Epler and company learned from last year, being a little bit too passive. And ultimately, I think that's what kind of bit them towards the end. If they're in it again, which obviously we think they will be, how aggressive they'll be and who they go after, we'll see. But, it's all about October.
I don't think they have a choice this year. Last year, I think they kind of thought they had a really good team, which they did. And I thought they thought they were going to get more out of some of the moves that they made. And it didn't work out, and it didn't work out to the point of a first round exit. So given what happened last year, given what Cohen's done for a timeline and where the Mets are now, I don't think they have a choice at this deadline. I think this is the deadline where you're going to see top prospects traded. I mean, this is all assuming that the Mets are right in the thick of things, which I think a lot of things would have to happen for them not to be. So, yeah, I mean, we're still talking early about this, but you brought up. So, I mean, I would have to imagine that Epler, Cohen, that group's going to be very aggressive.
Yeah, learn from your mistakes, whatever it is. I would assume the same. Even if they're on the fringe, like I said, it's 6 teams per league make this. Just got to get hot and win a few games and just get in. So whether they're scuffling a little bit at the deadline or not, I don't think they're gonna never think that they're not in it, if that makes sense, unless something catastrophic happens. But this is a veteran laden team. They're looking to make some noise here and go deep into October. But just kind of capping off things as far as spring training. We mentioned the likes of the Beta, the Vientos, Mauricios of the world. Jacob, is there any other prospects that you think Mets fans should be watching for camp, being on the lookout for this spring?
Yeah, I think the big one, Mike mentioned Kevin Parada before. Certainly excited to see him, and this is his first spring training because he was drafted last year. But the big one for me is Alex Ramirez, and just because he just took so many strides last year, and I don't even think he scratched the surface of what he could be, because he has all the warts that you would expect of a young, toolsy outfielder that hasn't fully grown into his frame yet. Like, he certainly has his his swing and miss in his game, and some inconsistencies in terms of his performance. Over the summer hit kind of a lull, but when he was on, he was really, really good, and he was good, if not above average at Brooklyn and High A the second half of the year. I would expect him to start the year in Binghamton, if not, be there pretty soon, which means he's coming. he's coming sooner rather than later. So to get a look at him in camp this year, that means Buck's going to have eyes on him, and he is looking out for the next wave of guys that he can ask for when he needs some help on the major league roster. So it's just a chance to make an impression, and I think he's got all the tools, both literally and figuratively, to make a big impression on the coaching staff for sure.
Yeah, and that's who I was going to kind of bring up. So, but to kind of add to it, I think Ramirez, he's a pretty lanky guy. So he looks like another guy. He looks like he's added a little bit of muscle. And he's also, it looks like he's made a little bit of change to his swing too, which for me was kind of where I questioned how he was going to progress long-term as a prospect. I mean, to put it mildly, he had a pretty big loop in his swing that essentially he ended up pushing a lot of stuff to right field and just couldn't pull pitches that you should be pulling. And it looks like he's kind of shortened that swing a little bit. Maybe that'll help with some of the swing and miss Jacob was talking about too. Besides, it should add some power too. This is a guy that does have some raw power and showed already last year with over 40 extra base hits. So, yeah, he's definitely, I mean, everyone kind of knows about Alvarez, Beatty, Vientos, and Mauricio now because We've seen him in springs. We've seen all of them but Mauricio in the big leagues. And everyone was talking about Mauricio this offseason because of winter ball, and he was one of the only players playing and played well. So Ramirez and Prado be kind of the two guys that Mets fans haven't really got to see much of. So that'll be exciting.
And those are guys who are now ranked higher than Mauricio and Vientos,
Oh.
and, both Ramirez and Parada,
Right.
just because the trend of Mauricio and Vientos, kind of the underlying statistics from last year, kind of made them slip down rankings. But Ramirez and Parada are both top 100 guys, so like you said, those are the guys that kind of need to be at the forefront of what Mets fans are watching out for.
Absolutely. And then I kind of wanted to add in that there are some, I mean, they're not top prospects, and a lot of them aren't even in the top 30, but bullpen pieces. I mean, teams go through bullpen arms. One we've talked about him a little bit on here is Grant Hartwick, who pitched on 4 levels last year, pitched really well. He's in big league camp, like 2 years removed from being in undrafted, and he's in big league camp pitching. He's certainly, I mean, he's going to go to AAA Syracuse, so he's certainly an arm to watch. Eric Orzi, another reliever with a good split fastball combo. Kind of had a rough year last year. Struggled staying healthy, which, I mean, is always going to turn into a rough year for a pitcher. So he's in big league camp too, so he's another guy to watch. And then Josh Walker. We were talking about lefties. Josh Walker is one of the only lefties that they have in camp. So tall guy.
Hey, put some respect on Zach Muckenhern's name, man.
I'm sorry, Zach Muckenhern. But so Walker missed most of last year with an injury, but came back at the end of the year, and his strikeout number spiked pitching out of the bullpen. He was throwing a little harder out of the bullpen, and he kind of refined. He was throwing more of a curve before, and it's kind of refined to a slider now. And I mean, fastball slider guy, lefty, that's a little lanky. I mean, those guys play. He struck out a bunch of guys in the Arizona Fall League, which is a hitter strong league. It's built for hitters. So he's kind of another guy to watch. He impressed Buck last year early in spring camp before he got hurt. So I'm sure Buck will have his eye on him again. So, I mean, the Mets team goes deep into their pitching every year, and there's always guys that you haven't heard of that end up pitching. So I think between Hartwick, Orzi, and Walker, I think there's a strong chance that at least 2 of those guys pitch in the big leagues this year.
Interesting. And, Mike, we've talked to, it feels like so many people within the Mets minor league organization, coaches and things like that, people in there, and the future just seems bright for them in general. A lot of these young guys, Paradas, the Ramirez, Beatty, all young, good looking studs, future of the organization. Looks like they can handle things real well. Hope it all works out. I wonder how much Parada lights maybe a little fire on the Alvarez, if that's even a thing. Because obviously Parada's a catcher too. I don't know what their long-term plans for him are, whatever, but I know the bat plays. But hey, competition's great. Some of these young guns, like you said, we'll see this year, and future's looking bright there. But I want to pivot a little bit from that to the front office, and the Mets made a hire of a familiar face, I should say. Mets former center fielder and manager for about 5 minutes, Carlos Beltran. He's a special assistant to the front office now. Just your initial thoughts, Jacob, just start with you, what you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the 6-7-year-old in me is freaking out because, he was one of my favorite players when I first started watching the Mets. Was, over the moon when they hired him to manage, and was, I understood why they had to part with him, but still kind of, felt he got a raw deal compared to some of the other people who were, implicated in that whole Astros scandal. So, feels like he's kind of done his time, even though he didn't really get punished, more than just kind of losing his job, which is a punishment. But, it's been a couple.
Didn't get elected to the Hall of Fame this year. Should have.
Which, I mean, he started off pretty well in his first ballot. I think he probably gets in eventually, but So anyway, it's just kind of good to see kind of a few years removed from that whole debacle, just to see him welcome back into the organization by new regime, new ownership. I think we see special assistant to the GM, and we kind of assume that that's going to mean he's involved in some way, more than he probably will be. I think like Buck said in his press conference today, like that he hopes he comes down to spring training. So like it's up in the air whether he's going to do that or not.
Right. Right.
So it's not a position that's going to mean much in terms of any moves or
Right.
anything. But we heard Lindor calling for him, and he was kind of a proponent behind that. And, Alex Cohen is also of Puerto Rican descent. Like Beltran and Lindor. So I think it's just kind of like a family thing, welcoming him back into the organization. And, hopefully he comes down to Citi Field and, whispers something to Marte or, Escobar or whoever, and they, hit 2 homers in a game that night or something. Like, you hope that's his impact on it. So yeah, just kind of something fun to see, and hope to see him around Citi Field this year for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point by Jacob. Because when you hear special assistant to the GM, and you just hear to the GM, and I think a lot of people were just thinking assistant GM, and I really don't think he's going to be like involved to that degree. And of course, it happened around the time that the Mets fired Bryn Alderson, who was the assistant GM. So there's a lot of assumption. Special assistant to the GM, even within the different major league organizations, is a really broad term. Like, it can be very little to like actually some teams where they are kind of an assistant GM. I think, like Jacob said, this is going to be more about like self-scouting. I mean, that's what Beltran does really well. He's worked with pitchers and hitters, whether it's tipping pitches. I mean, that's what he's good at. That's what this was based around, is he's helped pitchers show them what they were tipping, and he's helped hitters kind of help recognize stuff like that. So I think along those lines, I think it's going to be some self-scouting for the Mets themselves, and that'll be kind of his role. And Jacob also talked about, this is a guy, he was a teammate with Lindor and Diaz in the WBC before, and these guys see him as kind of like this father figure. So, this is a guy that they wanted in the organization, and that's 2 of your star players. So it's tough to say no to a guy that, the Mets wanted to do this anyway. They talked to Beltran about potentially being on the bench for a role, and it sounds like that's just not where he kind of wants to go just yet. I'm sure there's a little bit of sour taste there, understandably so. He, like you guys said, he got kind of a raw deal in that whole situation. But yeah, I think Beltran, look, he's a great baseball mind. So having him around for even as minimal as it might be, I think is great for the organization to have him with the Mets, to have him back there, to have him supporting those players, helping Epler any way he can. Epler has a relationship with him, so that's just another guy that he has a comfort level with. So, I think nothing but a good thing that they bring Beltran in, and hopefully he does come to camp. I definitely think he could help out there.
Yeah, I look at it more maybe as it's just the beginning of trying to get him back in the good graces of the game and with the Mets. And you mentioned the dugout. Obviously you didn't want to jump down there right away to become a bench coach, and obviously I'm sure it's demoralizing. You have to get hired as a manager. You don't want to be a bench coach, but I would assume that eventually he wants to get back into the dugout and man a dugout and manage. And, this might be a good first step for that. Who knows what happens? Who knows that this regime looks at him like that? But, Buck's an older guy. He's not going to manage forever now. It'll probably be a few more years, whatever. And maybe this is kind of the first steps to getting him back in there. But either way, like you guys said, he's great mind, one of the best center fielders of his generation, probably best, overall for, when he played. Can impart that kind of wisdom and knowledge whenever he's around. Who knows what the extent of the role is, but good to have him back in. It's nice you start making those amends there, and hopefully it all works out for him. But another thing, just real quick, talking about guys getting signed. SMY finally struck a deal with Keith Hernandez, the most important signing of the whole offseason. Forget everybody else. Supposedly a 3-year deal. Gary, Keith, and Ron back together like they always should have been. So just, Mike, I guess I'll start with you. Just reaction. Obviously something they had to do, but just glad it finally got done before the first real fake game start in a week.
So when Keith Hernandez was negotiating and the Mets were renegotiating with Correa, we legitimately ran a poll on MMO about who they thought negotiations were more important. And I don't remember the exact figures, but Hernandez either won by a slight bit or it was disturbingly close we're talking about a booth guy. I mean, the guy's a legend to Mets fans. He just is. And it would have been really weird. It is kind of weird when Gary and Ron are just in there. Like, it's not the same thing. So it would have been bizarre for like an entire year of just not having Keith and him in the booth. He just makes that group look. Gary's a great play-by-play guy. He does everything. Ron kind of gives us the insight from the pitching side, and he's pretty good too. I mean, he works for TBS, so he has his thing. And Keith is just kind of that guy that helps everything flow, and he's kind of the glue. And I mean, good for him. I'm sure a lot of it comes down to him just making sure he's getting the level of games that he wants to. I mean, he's not getting any younger, and he's had his own, just like Correa, he's had his own health issues over the last couple of years between surgeries and stuff. So, I'm just happy to see that he's going to be back with SNY, and it'll be another great year of those three guys.
Year 18, the record-setting year for the trio to pass Bob Murphy, Ralph Kiner, and Lindsey Nelson. So that's a cool bit of Mets history, and also I can use that as a demarcation of my Mets fandom, because I started watching games the same year that they started broadcasting as a trio. So I don't know who's going to last longer, but before the Mets drive me insane, or the three of them leave the booth. So. Good to see Keith get his deal, and good to see them all back together.
And it's kind of a segue to make sure that we recognize Tim Carver. Unfortunately, he passed away today. He was a legendary player and then a legendary broadcaster. We listened to him when I was younger, very young, doing Mets games, and then of course all of us. If you're a baseball fan, you listen to him, all-star games, playoff, all that stuff. I mean, one call that always comes to mind for me is the Dae-Sung Koo game where Koo gets the base hit off Randy Johnson. And as he's doing it, McCarver's like, this is the biggest give up at bat of the season. And then Koo gets the hit. And that just showed you how good he was, because he just rolled with it. He took a good laugh, and then he went into it and explained what was happening, and everything that was something that I always remembered. I mean, and going through not just baseball Twitter today, but Mets Twitter, some of the older fans, you could see just how much he kind of meant to them, and how they learned the game of baseball, how they learned those eras of Mets. So definitely a sad day for baseball and a sad day for the Mets community.
Yeah, and McCarver was a baseball lifer, obviously. I guess when two things you think of with the Mets, it's their pitching-rich franchise and broadcaster-rich. They've had, over how many decades? 6 decades now. Some of the best broadcasters in the sport. You know what I mean? For a team that's historically not a lot of good things to broadcast, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, like Mike said, I am too young to have listened to him do Mets games, so I know him from the Joe Buck to McCarver pair, on Fox, growing up, doing the World Series, All-Star Game, But, anytime you watch highlights of, obviously the 86 World Series, you hear Vin Scully, but any, Mets regular season highlights from the 80s, even into the 90s, he's like the voice of those broadcasts between him and Bob Murphy on the radio. And, some of the, Fran Healy, some of the other guys they had during that time. But he was there from, I think, 82 or 83 to 98, which is just kind of, an important stretch in franchise history from the beginning of the Keefe, Darryl, Doc era all the way to, catching Mike Piazza, when they traded for him. So, sad. I memean, it's nice that there's a Mets tie-in to someone who's as legendary in the game as he is. Mourning one of the legends of the game. I was looking at his stats earlier today. Did not realize he started his playing career as a 17-year-old in the 50s.
Yep.
And then lasted to the 80s, where he retired 79, came back for a couple of games in 80, which is crazy. So notable playing career, like you said, alongside the broadcasting career. So pretty good stuff.
Yeah, when you're catching Bob Gibson in the World Series, doing something right? One legend to another there. But Mike, do you have any other last minute comments before we wrap up for the week?
No, I think I'm just excited for all the guys to come into camp. Everyone will be here next week. I mean, with the WBC, I mean, there's a large portion, of the position players already here. So we've kind of got to see everyone already. I was thinking about it before the show, and I'm just like, pretty much everyone's here already. I think the only one I could think of off the top of my head was like Mark Canha, or might not be here yet. So I mean, everyone in camp, like you said, other teams have had some injuries already. Knock on wood, the Mets haven't had any of those guys come in with any muscle issues so far. So, I mean, hopefully, for the next week or so, that's what you hope for, is just everyone comes in healthy and get looking to some games pretty soon.
Yeah, a week from Saturday, February 25th, first real fake game of the year. Gary, Keith, and Ron in the booth, 6 o'clock. Who the heck cares who they're playing and who plays for the Mets? The fact that they'll be orange and blue on a field and we get to watch it, it's all good. We made it through. It's always a long 4 months in the off season, but we're here. I think that's everything I have. Jacob, thanks so much for coming on the show as always. Mike, I think you'll be away next week, but we'll catch you the week after. But I'll be back next week talking about everything that might be coming up in camp. Hopefully all good. But between now and then, let's go Mets.